All right. Now, there is something here in slide 6 where Drucker has a huge desire to see institutions be single purpose. That is, a business is primarily involved in wealth generation. A university is primarily involved in educating students and doing research. A government is primarily involved in providing security and in carrying out the normal functions of government in whatever form that government takes. Drucker's problem is with institutions that try to do things that are outside their mission. Okay, for example, in the U.S., and I'll use one from home here, our educational system, our teachers are involved in not only trying to meet standards, but they're involved in sex education, they're involved in drug abuse detection and so on. They're involved in alcohol awareness. They're involved in trying to provide students with life skills. But because they come from homes without parenting. So when you look at it, our educational institutions at the primary and secondary level are public ones, are multi-purpose. And if you compare them with so-called private or parochial schools, schools run by religious groups, right? Single purpose, right? Academic. And you look at the scores at the end of the process, and if you look at them at the end of the senior year, you will find that the dedicated single-purpose institutions outperform the public institutions, not by a little bit, but by a lot. Right? Because the teachers in public sector institutions are so encumbered with multiple purposes. In Drucker's world, multi-purpose institutions tend not to do well. If hospitals get involved in health education as well as healing, for example, they tend to do less well than if they're singularly focused on healing. Okay? And universities have a terrible time deciding what their purpose is. Okay, and but universities that are very, very clear, and we have a number of examples of them, tend to outperform those that have no identity whatsoever. So multiple purpose institutions do not, as a rule, perform well academically, as do the more focused ones. And so in the society of functioning organizations, the idea is everyone according to clear-cut mission, right? To a clear-cut mission. And the toughest one for Drucker has been government. He thinks that's the new, he thought that was the new frontier. Healing the sick, education of children, satisfaction of economic wants, that's business. Each has to be well managed if the society is to function at a high level. Now, I asked him one day, where, Peter, is all this happening best in your opinion? Oh, I don't know. He wasn't absolutely sure. He wasn't absolutely sure of what society best conformed to his notion of to the society of organizations with single purposes and function. He wasn't exactly sure. So each requires management. That's why he said, stop talking about business management. We're the M school, right? Not the B school. We get a degree, Master of Business Administration, but we are a management school, right? And that's his philosophy. It's all about management. It's not about business management. Although many of because of the sensitive thermometer that profit and loss provide, business has had to develop the competence in management that is very useful in other sectors. But in his opinion, as you move from business to the social sector, only about 10%, there's only a 10% change or so. These principles, if you read the Managing a Nonprofit Organization, you won't see too many things in that book that are not just applicable to all kinds of institutions. That's been my experience. So, with regard to developing nations, for example, Drucker would, for his mind, he would put more resources into teaching executives how to lead and function than he would in giving foreign aid. That is, the idea is teach these people how to fish rather than giving them the fish. Okay? Management is the greatest invention of the 20th century in Drucker's mind, and that's the book that kind of started it all. And management generates the wealth. Management provides the leadership group to help in the social sector, and management can help provide the skills required in to manage public institutions, whether it be universities and hospitals or government facilities. So each according to its mission, each managed well. Now, when you see oh, thank you. See,
It's late, so.
But then Drucker, later in his life, confronted a real problem. Okay, and that is a problem where government was run by special interest groups, where business was wealth creating, and where social sector institutions had their own narrow purpose. Then the question was, who is looking out for the common good if each institution pursues its own narrow purpose? You see? On one hand, you need institutions who are working toward their mission, right? On the other hand, if they take that very narrowly, who looks at the common good? Who's looking out for the common good? And here is where he begins to develop his new ideas with regard to social responsibility. And it's a biological analogy. Each institution is an organ of society. And no organ can survive outside of its body. We're so much a product of the society that we're a part of. We don't do it alone. But while focusing, therefore, on a single task, each institution should also seek the common good. And that's going through that last chart that we had. First, the mission of the organization, then looking at minimizing social impacts and turning impacts into opportunity, then begin to say, hey, we are a part of a bigger society. In Drucker's defense, he was never a free market champion. They're defensible only to the extent that they are good for society. Right? Look, it's that question that came up in the concept of the corporation, where executives would say, well, hey, look, greed is good. What's good for us is good for the country. And Drucker argued vehemently, no. He was the prophet. He really was the prophet, and at least in the United States, that would actually call people on the carpet. And he lived such a modest life, and he had such accomplishments that people, more often than not, took him seriously. not popular always. It's not popular all the time, right? To say, hey, you're pigs feeding at the trough, right? No one wants to hear that, right? No one wants to be called a pig, you know. But that's what he calls some executives. So the now, if in a pluralistic society, these special purpose organizations are only looking out for their own good, then the pluralistic society of special purpose organizations will only serve to weaken the conditions for a functioning society. You follow that? If you're only looking out for your self-interest, greed, and you're not taking a socially responsible, proactive kind of posture, then what you are doing is weakening the conditions for the society to function, not strengthening them. Right? So this concern that the institutions of society function for the common good led Drucker to be very critical of business practice. He was the inside outsider. He often called himself the insulted. People would hire him and he would insult them. And they would kind of feel good about it because of his stature. These ratios between the top and the bottom in the United States really bothered him. And he grew up in a time where 20 to 1 was
1984 CEO salary.
that,
1984.
is that CEO salaries?
Yeah. It's 1 to 20.
Some of the ratios between the compensation of top executives and those of the frontline workers are well above 500 to 1. Now, do people really need that?
Agreed.
Sends the wrong message. And he was never convinced that you had to offer $1 zillion to bid people away from competitors. That in fact purpose and people and values could be very influential in attracting certain kinds of executive talent. And there's enough evidence to that. Every company I've written about falls in that 15 to 20 to 1 range. Between, I don't mean necessarily the janitor, I mean the frontline worker. The frontline production worker and the top executive. And these were basically companies Drucker had a lot to do with. So corporate greed reflects a lot of a lack of concern for the welfare of employees and for the common good. And it sends a horrible, you see, when you emphasize integrity, you see the example that sends out to people? Now, what was interesting about the people